Well, good morning, everyone, and it's my absolute pleasure to be convening this panel as we are coming up to lunchtime on day 2 of the Sydney Dialogue. And speaking of 2, whilst AI's been around for decades, we are sort of coming to the end of year 2 of this new era of AI. And I think as the conversations over the last day and a half have shown, we're coming out of that hype cycle and entering the start of some skepticism, some really important conversations about the impact, and moving from the conceptual to the practical. The technology is getting better every day, but ensuring all parts of the world are poised to benefit is more crucial than ever. We've heard across the last day how the Indo-Pacific is the global powerhouse for economic prosperity, population growth over the decades to come. But it's also a region of extraordinary diversity. And just as our region is diverse, the topic we have to cover over the next 50 minutes is wide-ranging. And as a result, I'm really glad to be joined by these 3 panellists who each come at this topic with really different expertise and experience. So as we said, we're joined online by Urvashi. I'm very pleased that she's joined us from Goa. It's very early there, so we should be exceptionally grateful to her for being with us. And here on stage, delighted to have with me Akiko Murakami from the AI Safety Institute of Japan and Jonathan Rubinsztein, the CEO of NUIX. Now, we heard yesterday about one of the amazing things about humanity is our inclination for optimism. And as a result, I'm going to start also with an optimistic note, but I'm going to frame the discussion over the next 40 minutes or so in a very similar way to how Justin opened the dialogue yesterday by talking about opportunities, risks, and the calls to action. So AI is a general purpose technology, and as such, it has the power to transform business, government, and individual lives in as profound a way as the general purpose technologies that have come before it. Thinking here about the printing press some 500 years ago, electricity 150 years ago, or in our lifetimes, the personal computing or internet revolutions. And given the panellists we have here today coming from India, Japan, and Australia, I really want to zoom the conversation right down to the Indo-Pacific and talk quite specifically about the opportunities here for our region. One of these opportunities is, of course, economic, and I'll just start with a few numbers. In the middle of last year, Access Partnerships released a series of reports to highlight the opportunity of generative AI for economies around the region. These numbers are all in US dollar terms, but for a country like India, the productive capacity unlock could be some $620 billion. Indonesia, $234 billion. Japan, $1.2 trillion. Korea, $476 billion. Malaysia, $113 billion. Or the Philippines, $80 billion of productive capacity unlocked. Here in Australia, we've done some research with the Tech Council that showed for the Australian economy, the value add could be $115 billion. And only 2 weeks ago in New Zealand, we launched a report in Wellington that showed that for the New Zealand economy, it could add some $76 billion of productivity. So I'll start with Jonathan to think about it in terms of what this could mean for the business community here in the Indo-Pacific. And I'd like you to start by perhaps explaining a little bit about what NUIX does for the audience who might not be as familiar, but also to think about what does AI mean for your business, your customers, and perhaps even the Australian tech sector?
Well, thank you. So NUIX has built a platform, and our platform basically allows us to take massive data sets and understand them. And so we run, and so we sell that in various guises. We have a forensic investigation solution, we have a data privacy solution, we have a legal e-discovery processing solution. And so we come at AI very much from a data perspective, and our view is that data is what makes AI smart, and data can also make AI scary. So we try and understand data, and typically large data sets. And so the opportunity to us is also to start off with being able to understand what is your asset-based data and your liability data. And in large organizations, that starts off with an assessment of your data landscape. And so most people are looking at PII data as risky data, but of course they're trade secrets. There's a lot more complexity and granularity, if you want, at a data level. And so our view around the opportunity in the Indo-Pacific area, I think to start off with, there's clearly an opportunity for AI to be a leveler, if you want. So the opportunity for AI to take and provide nation states or countries or corporations, giving them an opportunity to be a leveler. And I think that's clearly the intent. I think there's a risk also, and we'll talk about the risk later, of the complexity of, in fact, data and AI to actually have exactly the opposite impact to organizations. We'll talk about that one later. But what I am seeing is AI is an enabling technology. And for an enabling technology to work, you've got to understand what your strategy is. And to me, from a corporation's perspective, I walk into boardrooms and there's often a conversation which is, what do we do about AI? And I always find that slightly unusual because the answer is obviously depends what your strategy is and how you're going to execute your strategy using AI. But I think what we do know is that understanding your data landscape, to me, being able to train your AI on the right areas, being able to protect, leverage, or govern your data assets, to me, is what it's all about. And then at a regional level, I think the opportunity to understand your data assets and what you are trying to achieve as a country, as a company, to me is the starting point, if you want.
Fantastic. Akiko, I'm going to move to you now. Japan has shown extraordinary leadership in the AI governance space as we enter the early thinking of setting new international cooperative mechanisms and norms. This has been done through the G7 Hiroshima process, but also, frankly, through your new institute. So I'd love your thoughts on how you see the opportunity for the Indo-Pacific to show leadership and continue to be at the forefront of this thinking.
Thank you. So as you mentioned, the AI Safety Institute opened in this February, and it's the very same time of the UK and the US established a similar organization. So the AI safety is have so various types of the aspect, not in the single aspect. So that's why it depends on the culture and it depends on the languages as well. So that's why the Japan is a non-English speaking country. So understanding what's the difference of the difference between the other language and Japanese. So that's why we are always thinking about what's the difference between the ordinary models built in the English and the other languages. So I think the leadership in Japan is not only for the culture and the language gaps, but also the Japanese are very keen about the quality of the products. So I think the data is also the source of the products. So that's why we are thinking about the data quality as well. So I think the Indo-Pacific area that we have so many variety types of the culture and the variety types of the languages. So we are, I think the most important part of the diversity of the AI. So we can lead such kind of this thinking types of the activity in the Pacific.
Thank you. And Urvashi, I'm going to turn to you now because so much of the work that the Digital Futures Lab is really thinking about this question of diversity and how can we incorporate opportunity for the Global South specifically in this AI era. So from where you're sitting in India, one of the most dynamic and diverse and growing populations in the world, where do you see the potential for AI to drive positive impact?
Thank you, and sorry I couldn't join you all in person. It looks like a fantastic event. Just picking up from what some of the other speakers were mentioning around the point around data, I think we all know that the quality of data really drives the quality of AI systems. And one of the problems we know in the global south is that there is the representation problem in terms of who is actually online right now. A large part of the global south is still not online, and even amongst those online, we see the women are not, there's not as many women as online. We see that a lot of other marginalized groups and social identities are not online. And this presents a major problem for countries in the global south like India from a kind of AI for good perspective. But at the same time, there's also an opportunity here, which is that many of these countries are actually at a stage of digitalization. We're not actually at a stage of AI. We're at a stage where digitalizing our economies, we're digitalizing our societies. So we have a real opportunity here, I think, to think about how we do responsible digitalization, to build the data set that we need to address specific problems that are purposefully representative, that are purposely inclusive of marginalized social groups and identities, something that countries in the global north may not have had the opportunity because digitalization has already happened and AI is being built on top of that. So I think there is a really strategic opportunity we have in the global south because we're at this early stage of digitalization. I think the other real opportunity we have in the global south is with regard to actually empowering and supporting local civil society actors. We know that in many countries like India, civil society, grassroots organizations have typically been underfunded. Many of these countries are young democracies, young institutional democracies, and so the civic space, civil society space is still quite weak and underdeveloped. And so there's a real opportunity to create tools that can support these organizations at the grassroots, be at the front lines of change, be the ones who are advocating for the type of change that is required, and be the ones who are advocating for those marginalized groups. So those two, I think, are some of the biggest opportunities we have in countries like India, which is in addition to, of course, everything else that the other speakers have said and what we already think of in the opportunity space.
And Urvashi, it's interesting you say that because I think actually some of the speakers yesterday were talking about the importance of those things globally, not just in the global south. And I think that that's perhaps even more pronounced and important to get right in many parts of our region. And whilst I wanted to start with hope, we can't have the conversation without looking at the flip side of that. And I think we will come to risks more specifically, even though all of you have quite rightly already started to touch on where we will be sort of delving into next. I think what we've learnt in the 21st century is that unfettered optimism and hope and trust in the technology is not going to set us up for success. And so what I think we're seeing in this, era of AI is actually, and it's encouraging that we're talking about opportunity and risk in the same sentence. We're looking at the two sides of these coin concurrently, which I think is demonstrative of a level of maturity and initiative in this whole conversation. But I want to just talk a little bit about how Microsoft is thinking about responsible AI. And it was only this week that we celebrated the 5th year of our Office of Responsible AI, which is actually led by a New Zealander, Natasha Crampton. We've been on our responsible AI journey for longer than those 5 years, of course. But I think what we've learnt along the way is that you can't get it right the first time. It's a constant and evolving process of iterating, improving, sharing what we're learning. But I think also, equally importantly, and it comes to the group we've got on this discussion today, is there's not an answer that sits in government or in business or in industry or in civil society alone. It's about bringing all those pieces together. So, Urvashi, you touched on some of the opportunities of getting this right. And I think, the flip side of that is naturally what is the consequence or the potential harm of getting it wrong? I would love for you to talk a little bit more about where you see those harms and risks specifically through the work that you do at your lab.
Sure. I think some of the discussions around issues like bias, privacy, discrimination, even misuse are quite well established. And I'd like to kind of build on that a little bit, to kind of expand this conversation, and maybe just picking up on the framing that you've suggested on kind of opportunities and risks. And I think, it is having worked in this space now for nearly a decade, it is really reassuring to see that opportunities and risks are being spoken about at the same time. But at the same time, I think that there is a tendency that we assume that there will always be an ability for us to balance it. There is, in fact, some risks that are actually entailed in the opportunities. So if we look at the environmental harms of AI systems, whether it's in terms of energy consumption or carbon emissions or water usage, that is inbuilt into the innovation trajectory. So in that sense, it's not so easy to pull out the risks on one hand and pull out the opportunities on the other hand and talk of them as a balancing act. Yeah. Similarly, if one thinks about labor, a lot of when we talk about the AI industry is moving so fast, technology is moving so fast, it's also happening because there is cheap labor in some parts of the world, which is exploited, which is not paid fairly, which works in very poor conditions. So there is this point of exploitation that is enabling the pace at which technological innovation is happening. So to some extent, yes, it's a balancing act, but to some extent, I think also we cannot think of the risks as existing outside of the opportunities. And that, I think, is the real conundrum, and that's the really thorny challenge we have to address. Just a second point I'd like to mention, and then I'll stop there, is that I think the other real risk is that AI innovation will be led by the market, as opposed to being led by what is in the public interest. And we really need to make sure that public interest goals are at the heart of what is driving AI innovation, not that the market is determining the public interest goals and the rest of society is actually trying to catch up. Yeah. So we see a lot of conversation about AI use cases for SDGs, etc. But I don't believe actually that a whole bunch of use cases are going to add up to system change. We still need a theory of change that has to be shaped by policymakers, that has to be shaped by domain experts. And then we need to create innovation that supports that theory of change. And that's where I see currently a disconnect in how the innovation ecosystem is playing out. So unless we realign kind of AI innovation trajectories with the public interest, many of the issues that we keep talking about are going to keep coming up, and it's kind of like plugging holes in a leaky dam.
Yeah. It's a really important nuance that I think you've added to that about how do you sort of do two things at once, but what is a level of trade-off that is built in, and to what point is that acceptable or unacceptable, and how do we start to have that conversation but also mitigate that, that trade-off and that harm. And Jonathan, I know that you're thinking about this sort of every day in the way you do your business. You told me yesterday that NUIX's motto is being a force for good by finding truth in the digital world. But to do that, the constant trade-off is how do you find the truth safely, and what are the decisions that you're making in your business about how you go about that? If you think about it through that risk lens, maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about how you think about it in the activities that your business is driving.
So I think from our perspective, the biggest risk with AI is humans. AI empowers stupid humans, it empowers smart humans, it empowers angry humans, it empowers peaceful humans. And I think that assuming that government is going to manage the AI impact and outcomes, I think is always scary, because government also has different outcomes that they're looking for. Yeah. And so, again, as a corporation, what we did was we put at the center of our DNA our purpose statement. We said, and when I joined NUIX, our purpose statement was finding truth in the digital world. And my question was, who cares? Who cares if Xi Jinping or Putin finds truth? Is that a good outcome? And so we changed our purpose statement to being a force for good by finding truth in the digital world. What's interesting is there aren't that many corporations. I can think of a couple that put a positive affirmation around the world. Maybe one I can think of, do no evil, was one that was at one stage a purpose statement. I'm not sure that's a great purpose statement. Kind of the bottom of the level human, do no evil. But I do think that then we think about how we manage everything we do. So we have good hiring, we have good firing. We have good being. What does it mean to be a human in the organization? We've got good building, which is our responsible AI. One of our key tenets to good building is that any promotion of any insight goes to a human to make the decision. And so I think that it's a super complex issue because, you know, we as a society haven't managed to resolve simple negative externalities that big tech have created, whether it be suicide, increase in suicide, And so I'm not quite sure we'll be able to manage the negative externalities of AI. But to me, the biggest externality and the biggest risk I think that we have is the Gini coefficient. And the Gini coefficient is the ratio between rich and poor. And I think that has a direct causal link to social unrest. And so I'd suggest that the Gini coefficient is, to me, the biggest concern I have, which is, does AI, based on certain massive capital requirements, building LLMs, which are typically massively expensive, does that further increase the ratio between rich and poor? And that is one of my biggest concerns from a societal perspective.
Akiko, before I turn to you, Urvashi, I know that you think about this a lot, so I didn't know if you wanted to add anything on to Jonathan's comments there before we move to Akiko.
I mean, just to say that I couldn't agree more. I think one of the other major risks is the kind of concentration of power we see in the current AI ecosystem. And that concentration of power is increasing as we enter this LLM era. And it's not only increasing in terms of those who are building these systems, but it's also increasing in terms of those who can actually audit these systems, right? That talent and that expertise is really concentrated in a very handful and a small handful of individuals. And if you look at it from the global south perspective, it's an even bigger challenge because we don't have those individuals sitting in as many numbers in our parts of the world. So how we really address that concentration of power. And again, that's another space where the risk is kind of built in to the opportunity because AI requires scale, it requires capital. So how we address that, I think, is a serious conundrum.
And when you're talking about, the resources required to do some of the safety testing and the skills that are needed, I think that brings us nicely to Akiko and how the AC in Japan was established to look at these questions around transparency, AI testing, and AI safety. So I would love for you to share a little bit more about the work of the institution. As you said, it was founded in February, so it's still a young institution. Even in a developed economy like Japan, how are you attacking the questions of having, the right people and the right resources to do that work?
Yeah, thank you. So risk is a very difficult word. It is very difficult to identify and the risks, the various types of the risks there. So I think there is no straightforward way to avoiding the risks. But we just the thinking of the risk and knowing the risk of the AI is the first step of the thinking about the AI. So that's why the AI Safety Institute, one of the mission of the institute is that the sharing all of the information related to the AI risk from all over the world and sharing this information to the public, not only for the sharing the information inside Japan, but also the gathering the information inside Japan and provide to the public, outside Japan as well. And also communicate with the other AI Safety Institute and finding out the best way to avoiding the risk in the world level. And also the providing some guideline is one of the key activities. So because of the AI is very fast to changing the rapidly, so that's why we cannot cover all of the risks with the law or the regulations. So that's why we providing the guideline. So in Japan, the AI guidelines for business already happened, and this guideline is a living document. We have to update it every single day, not a year, but month or something. Yeah. And also we're thinking about the red teaming. So I don't know the friendly word for in this room, but the red teaming is a kind of the readiness for the attacks outside the system. So we are going to provide how to formulate the red teaming in the organization. And also we are thinking about how to evaluate the AI risks. So it's very difficult because of we cannot list up all of the risks of the AI yet. But we started the obviously risk to evaluate this system is safe and this system is not. So from the output. So that's the recent activities for our institute, and tightly connected to the institute, like the AI linked to the AI safety in the world. We share the information, and in the future, we are the certify or something by each mutually. So.
And I think when you're talking about the risk-based approach, that's where this question of focusing first on the highest potential for harm is a way of being both thoughtful about the resource allocation that these sort of testings and mechanisms require, as well as leaving that space for adoption and innovation in a way that enables.
Yeah, that's right. So because of we are doing the AI safety related activities, but not to stopping the innovation with the AI. So I think this is a kind of the guardrail for the AI risk. So this is a risk for it's not good to going to this way, but the innovators and other the people can go straight in that very safety way. So that's the purpose of our institute.
And now we're getting to essentially what the title of the panel is when we're talking about AI readiness a little bit more specifically. And there's lots of ways we can think about this. I think one of the important pieces is about the infrastructure that's required, and as Urvashi said, that doesn't come without its own risks and considerations. But from the Microsoft perspective, we're investing heavily in the data center and hyperscale infrastructure around the world. We've made announcements that many in the room will be familiar with about our investments in Australia, but perhaps less familiar is investments that we're making in other parts of the region like Malaysia and Indonesia. And that's also just about making sure that there is access to this technology across the region and not just in a market like Australia. All of these announcements are not just about the infrastructure, though. It's also about security, investment in security and investment in skilling and the other pieces that we think are required to equip the different parts of the world with the ability to safely capture these opportunities. Akiko, you and I talked yesterday a little bit about skills, and we've already spoken about it a little bit as a group today, but naturally skills are going to be an important part of AI adoption, but also AI safety. So can you share your perspectives on that as one of the building blocks for readiness, as well as anything else that you're thinking about as we approach the next steps?
Yeah, so you mentioned about the skills or the knowledge for the AI, because of if the people feel the non-safety is without the appropriate knowledge for the AI. So actually, I am the AI Safety Institute director, but I'm also had another hat as in the private sector. I'm working for the P&C insurance company as a chief data officer, and most of the big company in the finance hesitate to using the AI in the 2 or 3 years ago because they do not have much information about the AI. But now we think about that. Do not using the AI is a new risk because of most of the company utilize the AI properly. So it's a very convenient way. And very efficient for the work. But if without the AI, the economic is very decreasing. So that's why I think providing the appropriate information and knowing very much for the AI, the profit and the risks is both ways is a very more important part.
And actually it comes back to where Jonathan started, which is about how does that align with business strategy and the need for there to be a problem or a purpose that you're trying to achieve rather than AI for AI's sake. I'm going to go to Urvashi next on the question of AI readiness and how you're thinking about it, but after that we'll be coming to the audience for questions, so do start to think about any questions you might have for our panel. But Urvashi, I'm just keen to hear your thoughts on these building blocks for readiness as you see them.
I think you've already touched upon some of the infrastructure issues, whether it's in terms of kind of data centers or other kind of computational infrastructure. And I think the panelists before have also spoken about, I think, quantum and so on and so forth. I think the really big missing piece from where I sit is the kind of capacity of public sector officials to be able to decide what is appropriate, what kind of solutions they should be procuring, how they should be using them, how they should be governing them. Because what we see right now is that without public sector officials having that kind of knowledge about, what is responsible AI, what is appropriate AI, they're being sold a lot of solutions by market players, not all of which are actually beneficial from a public interest potential. From a public interest perspective, and I think the state really has an important market shaping power and can set the standard or set the bar for what is good and responsible AI. I think that's a really important piece, along with kind of building critical AI literacy amongst the larger population. And by that I don't mean STEM skills, but I mean the ability to be able to recognize what is an AI system, to be able to use the kind of judicious use and adoption of those AI systems amongst the broader consumer base, and alongside that also media literacy on AI. And all of these really need to go together if as a society we're going to be ready to be able to mitigate some of the changes that we see and build that kind of resilience.
Thank you. We had a great presentation yesterday on that real question of media literacy and how do we improve the ability for societies to cope with, I think the quote was the cocaine that can be social media and its impact. Urvashi, I might just stick with you quickly for a follow-up question, because we do have a lot of government officials in the room here with us today who come to events like the Sydney Dialogue to enhance that government-to-government cooperation. But if you're thinking about the different capabilities or knowledge that are sitting within different governments, do you have any thoughts on how we can be best sharing at that government-to-government level and cooperating?
I think just doing that, sharing at a government-to-government level in itself, I think would be extremely beneficial. I mean, I see, for an example, in a number of countries in South Asia, we have not, for an example, put in place kind of procurement policies for how we buy AI in the public sector. And I think procurement, for an example, could be a really practical way in which governments embed considerations around responsible AI, social justice, human rights into their adoption of AI. And I think there's a lot of learning that countries in the global south and across could actually share on things like procurement, especially now when we start talking about kind of foundation models or frontier models, we start talking about open source AI, the number of challenges are just increasing. So I think we really need to find those opportunities for governments to be able to share and then be able to translate them into very actionable, concrete policies so that it just doesn't remain at the level of guidelines and principles. And eventually that's good for building trust, right? It builds trust in the society. It builds trust amongst consumers in buying and among businesses in buying and using AI.
Thank you. Jonathan, I'll turn to you before we go to the audience for some questions. But, as a businessman, the trust of your customers and the trust in the technology that you're deploying is obviously crucial. But further than that, how do you see the readiness question, and what do we need to be thinking about for having the region be AI ready?
So I think I'll start off with what I started off originally, which was figure out what your purpose is, whether it's a business or a country or so again, what is your purpose? And then I'm slightly subjective, but to me it's all about the data. Yeah. And so prepare your data, and we think about that in terms of protect, govern and leverage your data sets. So that means understand what data sets you've got, make sure that they're ethically sound, you source them correctly. But to me, those two things, prep for what you need. And of course, there is a massive issue in the scenario that you pre-data stage in digitization. And Urvashi explained that super well, which is, we've got a step which is actually just to bring certain societies up to actually having a digital framework versus a data framework, if you want. But I think those two, from the purpose and then prep your data, and that provides probably the initial steps. In terms of kind of procurement and all those other areas, I mean, I think those are absolutely critical. Figuring out how to manage massive, decentralized, complex decision-making processes in government always scares me. So I have no answer for that.
Urvashi, you've done a lot of work on data and the problems with existing data sets when it comes to, bias or perpetuating historical inequalities. Do you have any thoughts on how we go about improving that situation?
I mean, I think the first thing that we need to recognize is that bias is not a problem that is going to go away. Bias is how we make decisions. Bias is embedded in our societies. We always discriminate. What are we going to eat today? Where am I going to go on holiday, right? Like, you're making a decision, and that's some kind of discrimination. So the idea that it's going to go away, I think, is a fallacy. And so even kind of pursuing too strongly technical solutions for debiasing, etc., I think have a natural kind of limit. I think it's more important to recognize what the bias is, and then to decide based on what the consequence of that bias is, how appropriate is that AI solution, and how might I mitigate it in that context specific way. And I don't think there a kind of one size fits all solution would work. It would have to be kind of very use case specific. It would also have to be very context specific. What constitutes fair practice in a particular cultural context would not look fair in a different cultural context. So I think just being real that it's not going to go away, and instead it's important to recognize it and then decide on how and where we want to use AI is probably the more practical way forward.
Akiko, did you want to add something to that?
Yes. So because of the you mentioned about the biased data, so because of the data came from the other cultural spaces or created by the very biased people. So I think it is needed to knowing what's the data came from. So you mentioned about the quality data is one of the aspects is kind of what's the original data is worth. And also thinking about the evaluation processes, using the data for the evaluation processes as well. And so not just the data, just translate it is not good. So that's why I think the most important part of the thinking about the risk and thinking about the biases by ourselves. So because of this is not the problem outside our system, but the issues and challenges. So that's why we have to prepare thinking about the risks by ourselves and prepare the data by ourselves, and the maintenance the data by ourselves is the most important part.
So we've got some time for questions before I'm going to vox pop my panel with one last question from me. So is there anyone in the room who would like to ask questions of Akiko, Jonathan, or Urvashi? Got one here.
Thank you. My name is Ernst Norman. I'm the cyber ambassador of the Netherlands. Actually, I would like to share an experience how we learned it the hard way in the Netherlands. We became very tough on the use of social security for childcare. And the parliament and government was absolutely fanatic on how to avoid misuse of the funds and the fraudsters. And because of that, and because of the use of an algorithm, they selected large groups of minority groups as being fraudsters. And they had to pay back large sums of money, thousands of euros, to the government, and came in all financial distress. You talk about thousands of people. It was also because of the insistence of two parliamentarians who understood the system that the government had to open up what actually happened. And right now, the government is trying to solve the issues still. We're working on it for years. It will cost billions of euros to compensate the victims. But the way we learned about it is that we created a registry for algorithms used by the government. The registry is open to everyone, also internationally. Everyone can access these algorithms. we started creating a framework how algorithms should be used in the government. It should be open and transparent. And finally, also there's a human rights and risk assessment involved in applying these algorithms. So this way we hope that we can avoid a repetition on it. But like I said, it's learning the hard way, and hopefully our experience helps also other countries, because we have information we can share with other countries to avoid this kind of mistakes, using algorithms in the wrong way, which are often very biased. Thank you.
Thank you. Any reactions from the panel before we go to another question? No? Oh, I know it's before lunch, but... No more questions?
I'll ask the question. All right. Yeah, Urvashi, I just wanted to thank you for your key points and your outlined, you actually highlighted the role of civil society. So I just wanted to ask you more on this in terms of the region, like South Asia specifically, and what role can civil society play in this aspect? Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that question. I think civil society, in the South Asian context, as in many other countries, one of the chief kind of use cases or areas of AI application is to drive development, is to address kind of very persistent socioeconomic development challenges. And I think that civil society and grassroots organizations who are actually working with communities on the ground have such a fantastic body of knowledge and such a fantastic vantage point in terms of what is the change that is actually needed. So they really have a crucial role to be in shaping or influencing the kind of AI solutions and the kind of AI interventions that are needed, and also helping governments, also helping market players understand and anticipate the kind of harms and risks that might be experienced by marginalized sections of the population that may not be part of the typical frame of reference for someone who is developing a product or someone who's sitting in government. So I think civil society has a really important role to play in both kind of the problem diagnosis, what should AI be solving for, as well as in advice on what are the kind of risks that we need to start addressing and we need to kind of be watchful for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Got one more over here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sherry Huang. I'm from the Hewlett Foundation based in the US. And this question sort of builds on the prior question, and it's for Akiko. As you're working with AI safety institutes in the US and UK and other countries, have the role of civil society come up in your discussions? Like, from what you've shared so far, it sounds like a lot of the AI Safety Institute's work is focused on government and the private sector. Has the Japanese AI Safety Institute or the AI Safety Institutes in other countries spoken about interacting with civil society, and what role do you see civil society playing in the work that you do? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I think the AI Safety Institute is the institute for helping the government to the thinking about the AI risks and the establishment, the regulation or the law. And also we are now supporting the private sector to getting the information about the AI safety. But I think the most important part of the stakeholder of the AI is the users. So the society is the most important part of the AI. But I think the most of the people do not care about using the AI if the AI is obviously using like the chatbot or something. For instance, the face recognition is obviously AI, but the users do not care about the AI is using behind the scenes. If the people recognize the faces between the camera. But I think it is important that the AI is utilized here, and your data is sending to the AI, but this data is utilized only your benefit. And so the transparency is the most important part. So that's why the AI Safety Institute, Japan AI Safety Institute, do not support the people directly, but through the activities in the private sector and the public sector, we are going to support such kind of the transparency and the trustworthy. So that's the point. And also, I have a very important experience in Japan last month. The Tokyo University held the dialogue, named the AI dialogue with the people to thinking about the AI benefits and risks at the same time. And I'm here about so many interesting opinions from the people. And the activity is not held in Tokyo, but it's held in the German and the other countries. And the university will comparing the result of the opinion from each people in the world. So I think it is very important to thinking about the AI risks from the very various types of the way, because of we set the AI risks in one dimension. For the another people is a very it's not the safe. So that's why we need the various diversity, like in this room, to the thinking about the AI. So that's why our institute try to include the more people and the more countries to the activity.
I think it's a great point, that engagement with civil society, with academia, coming together to share those insights and lessons learned. And I think you were talking about it being in Tokyo, but I think, in a country as expansive as in Australia, it's about also getting out of the big cities and bringing in the perspectives of people, regardless of where they're living. I just want to go final Vox Pop. So Urvashi, I'm going to start with you on screen. If you could make one recommendation for a concrete action that we could take today to help the Indo-Pacific be AI ready, what would that action be?
I'm not going to give you a concrete action in the way perhaps they're imagining it, but just to suggest that I think there's a very strong narrative that using AI we can leapfrog some of the persistent kind of socioeconomic challenges we have in the region. And I just kind of want to emphasize that it's not possible to leapfrog institutional development. It's not possible to leapfrog building the societal capacities we need for resilience. And so we should be really cautious about this kind of leapfrogging narrative and ensure that alongside kind of driving innovation, we're also building resilient societies, building resilient communities that are able to navigate this change. And a lot of that really rests on making investments in the analog aspects of our digital economy, about making investments in education and public health and so forth. And to ensure that you don't neglect those and there isn't a diversion of public funding from some of those core aspects, because in the longer run, that will enable a more trustworthy AI innovation ecosystem.
I think it's an excellent point that institutional resilience is also another crucial part of it. Jonathan, to you.
I think it's probably an investment in sustainable infrastructure and just making sure that we've got sustainable infrastructure, both compute power, and obviously from a security perspective, would give us kind of infrastructure to drive the capability.
And Akiko, final thought goes to you.
Okay, so I think we have to do the activities after this session. So the first one is the more diverse in the thinking about the AI, not only for the risk, but also the beneficial aspects. So it is very crucial that the thinking about the things from the diverse way. So not only for the AI, but I think especially for the risks, the risk is a very various types of the risks. So we're thinking about it with a diverse way. And another thing is the sustainable. I put the keyword from your talk in a sustainable way. So if the thinking about the risk and mitigates the risk from the AI risk, is that we have to thinking about the sustainable way. So like the sustainable activity like the SDGs, we are thinking about what's the incentive for the thinking about the AI risk for the developer and all the stakeholders. So that's the point I would like to mention.
Well, as I started, this took, a very weaving route to talk about a really broad topic. I think that our panelists have highlighted that opportunities and risks are definitely very much intertwined, and we need to be thinking about them both. Some of those risks are built into the opportunity, and so how do we come at building our resilience and our preparedness from all angles to ensure that we're baking in the inclusion and diversity angle from the very beginning is crucial. So I would like to thank our panelists very much for this conversation. Thank you to the audience for engaging in it.